The day Diane Ashford fired me, she didn't even look up from her desk. "We're restructuring," she said. Her pen kept moving. "Your position is being eliminated. HR will walk you out." That was 11 words. 7 years of my life. And she gave me 11 words and kept writing. I remember standing there for a moment, just long enough to embarrass myself, waiting for something. More. An acknowledgement. A look. I'd built the core routing architecture for her whole platform. I'd slept in that office for 3 winters running. I had a son at home, 4 years old, who I'd promised I would pick up from daycare on time for once that Friday. 11 words. I picked Wyatt up on time. That part I got right. What I didn't know, walking out of the Ashford Systems lobby that afternoon with a banker's box and a lanyard still around my neck, was that 1 week earlier, 7 days before those 11 words, the patent application I'd been working on for. 18 months had been filed, my name on it, my architecture, my 4,200 hours of original work, translated into a filing that would eventually become U.S. Patent 7,841,203. I didn't know that part for another 19 years. I should back up. My name is Garrett Cole. I grew up in Hartwell, Ohio, the kind of town where you fix things yourself, because there's no one else to call. My father ran a small engine repair shop on Clement Street, until his hands gave out, and I spent my childhood under that man's instruction. You do the work, you do it right, and you don't make noises about it. That was the whole curriculum. I came up through systems architecture the same way. Community college, then a state school on a partial scholarship, then 6 years contracting for telecom firms before Ashford Systems brought me in as a full employee in the spring of 1998. They were building a data routing platform for enterprise clients. Ambitious, underfunded, the kind of project that needed someone willing to stay late and care more than they were paid to. That was me. That was us, always me. Diane Ashford had a gift for vision. I'll give her that, even now. She could walk into a room, see the shape of something that didn't exist yet, and make you believe you could build it. She was sharp and relentless, and she made you feel, for a while, like you were part of something that mattered. I believed in what we were building. I put everything I had into that architecture. I also signed a contractor services agreement at hiring, which I didn't read carefully enough. Nobody tells you at 29 to read your employment papers like a man who expects to be robbed. When the routing system worked, really worked, the night in November 2004, when our first enterprise client pushed 40 gigabytes through it without a single packet lost. Diane shook my hand. She said, "This is the thing, Garrett." I went home and told Wyatt's babysitter she could leave, and I sat in the kitchens with my sleeping 4-year-old in the next room, feeling like I had finally built the thing I was supposed to build. 3 months later, I was restructured out, 7 days after the patent was filed in my name. The following month, the assignment was quietly transferred to Ashford Systems, Inc., under a clause in that contractor agreement I'd signed in 1998, the same clause a judge would later determine had no legal standing for a salaried employee. But I didn't know that yet. I was in Hartwell with a 4-year-old and a mortgage, and no job, trying to remember what my father had taught me about fixing things yourself. I fixed things. I took on IT consulting work, slow at first, then steadier. The first year was lean enough that I kept a running tab of what I owed my sister in grocery money, and paid it back $20 at a time. The second year I landed a contract with the Hartwell School District, aging server infrastructure, 3 buildings, a budget that would have made a city firm laugh. I did it right anyway. Word spread the way it does in a town that size, and by the 3rd year I had enough steady work to stop counting weeks. I built Cole Infrastructure Group the same way my father had built the engine. Shop. One job at a time, no job too small, every client treated like the only one. Municipal contracts, school districts, regional hospitals, county emergency services. The kind of work that keeps things running, for people who don't have the budget to think about it twice. I hired a part-time bookkeeper named Ruth Ellery, who had the organizational instincts of a military logistics officer and the patience of a woman who had been doing the real work while other people took the credit her entire career. She stayed 17 years. Nothing we did made headlines. Everything kept the lights on, for our clients and for us. I didn't follow what Ashford Systems was doing. I made a decision early that looking backward was a tax I couldn't afford. Sometime around 2009, I saw a business journal piece about Ashford expanding into federal contracts, and I closed the browser and went back to a network diagram I was building for Hartwell Memorial's radiology wing. That was the right call. I made it every time the opportunity to look back came up, which was maybe 4 or 5 times over the years. And it never cost me anything I needed. I had a kid to raise and a business to keep solvent. I let Hartwell fill up my attention the way it always had, which turned out to be exactly enough. Wyatt grew up well. That's the thing I'm most proud of, and I'll say it plainly. He grew up with a father who came home at night and coached his Little League team badly, and knew the names of all his teachers. He grew up watching me fix things, routers and switches, and a '94 Ford Ranger that had no business running as long as it did, and he grew up knowing that a man who does the work quietly and does it right is not a lesser kind of man. He turned out to be someone worth knowing, and most of that isn't my doing, but I was there, and being there is not a small thing. The letter came on a Thursday in March, 19 years after that Friday afternoon with the banker's box. It was from a firm in Clumps, Kettner and Marsh, IP litigation, and it was 8 pages long. I read it at the kitchen table while Wyatt, home from college for spring break, made eggs on the stove behind me. The summary, as best I could absorb it, a paralegal named Sandra Briggs, auditing Ashford Systems' patent portfolio in preparation for a corporate acquisition, had found a discrepancy. The original patent application for what had become the core IP in Diane Ashford's platform, now valued as part of a $340 million acquisition deal, currently on the table, listed a primary inventor named Garrett A. Cole. The employment records for that same period listed Garrett A. Cole as a salaried employee, not a contractor. The contractor's services clause used to assign the patent to the company had no legal force under Ohio employment law for salaried workers. The assignment was invalid. I read it twice. Dad. Wyatt had turned around. He was watching me. What is it? Eggs are burning, I said. He turned back. I read it a third time. Kettner and Marsh was representing the acquiring firm. They needed to clear the IP title before the deal could close. They were requesting my cooperation in resolving the discrepancy. And enclosed, for my review, was an offer that began with a figure that had 7 digits and a comma in a position I'd never seen in correspondence addressed to me. I called my own attorney the next morning, a man named Phil Okafor, who had handled my business contracts for 11 years and who I trusted completely. Phil is the kind of lawyer who doesn't perform. He just reads everything twice and tells you what is true. He doesn't charge you for optimism. He called me back that afternoon. Garrett, he said, this is real. We didn't move fast. That was Phil's advice, and I took it. We reviewed everything. The original employment records, the patent filing, the contractor agreement, the assignment document, the Ohio statute. Phil brought in a specialist from Cleveland, a woman named Dr. Faye Aldrin, who had spent 30 years in patent law and who spoke about IP ownership the way my father had talked about engine tolerances, with complete precision and no interest in how you felt about it. 6 weeks of careful, quiet work. I told no one. Not Ruth, not Wyatt. I waited until I had something solid enough to carry before I picked it up. That had always been my way. The acquiring firm needed the deal to close by a hard deadline. Ashford Systems was under pressure. Diane Ashford herself, I was told secondhand, was calling the Columbus firm twice a day. Phil and I flew to Columbus on a Wednesday in May. I hadn't been in a room like that in 20 years. A glass conference room on the 14th floor, the kind with the city spread out behind the long table, where the air has that particular stillness of a place where large sums of money are regularly decided. I wore the same suit I'd bought for my father's funeral, which fit better than it had any right to after 12 years in a closet. Diane Ashford was already seated when we came in. I hadn't seen her in 2 decades. She had the same posture, straight, composed, the kind of stillness that reads as authority until you've watched it long enough to see it's something closer to control. Her hair was silver now. She looked like someone who had spent 20 years winning. She looked at me once when I walked in. That was all. The lawyers did most of the talking for the first hour. The acquiring firm's team, Phil, Ashford's outside counsel, a patent specialist who had flown in from Chicago. I sat and listened. I had learned, in the years running Coal Infrastructure Group, that the man who talks least in a negotiation is usually the one who goes home with what he came for. The facts were not in dispute. That was what made it clean, and I suspect what made it hard for Diane. There was nothing to argue. The employment record was clear. The statute was clear. The original filing was clear. Her counsel tried twice to advance the contractor's services interpretation and twice the Chicago Specialist quietly took it apart. At the second hour, Diane spoke directly to me for the first time. "You should have come to us," she said. "When the assignment was filed, you could have raised it then." I looked at her for a moment. "I didn't know," I said. "You didn't tell me the patent had been filed. You handed me a box." She didn't answer that. The terms we reached that afternoon were straightforward. A licensing settlement that gave Cole Infrastructure Group, my company, a percentage of the acquisition value, plus ongoing royalty rights on any commercial deployment of the patented architecture. Phil had prepared the number carefully. It was fair. It was also the kind of number that changes what the next 20 years look like for a man who grew up on Clement Street, in Hartwell, Ohio. I signed where Phil told me to sign. Diane Ashford signed across the table. I watched her hand move across that document, and I thought about 11 words, and a pen that kept going. I thought about Wyatt at 4 years old in his daycare classroom, waiting. I thought about my father's shop and the curriculum he taught me. You do the work, you do it right, and you don't make noise about it. I didn't make noise. When it was done, the lawyers began gathering their papers. One of the acquiring firm's partners, a younger man, maybe 35, leaned across the table and shook my hand with both of his and said something about the architecture being 20 years ahead of its time. I thanked him. I meant it. Diane stood. She was looking at the window, at the city, at something past the glass, and I thought she wasn't going to say anything at all. Then she turned. "You built a good company," she said, "in Hartwell." It was a strange thing to say. I think it was the closest she had. "I had good reasons to," I said. I wasn't thinking about her when I said it. I was thinking about Wyatt making eggs on the stove, and the way he'd turned around without drama, and watched my face, and how that's the thing about a kid who grew up right. He knows when something matters, and he doesn't need you to explain it to him. Phil and I took the elevator down to the lobby in silence. On the sidewalk outside, he adjusted his bag on his shoulder and looked at me the way a man does when the outcome is better than he was prepared to promise you. "Dinner?" he said. "I need to call my son first," I said. Wyatt picked up on the second ring. I stood on a Columbus sidewalk in my father's funeral suit, and I told him the short version, what it was, what it meant, what came next. He was quiet for a moment the way he gets when he's thinking it through. "Dad," he said, "you built that thing." 20 years ago, I said. "Doesn't matter when," he said. "You built it." I stood there another moment with the afternoon sun coming through the buildings and the sound of the city going on around me, and I thought about the long way around. The 11 words in the banker's box and the small firm and the school district, contracts, and every year I chose to come home instead of look back. It was a long way around, but I came home the whole time.